All right, in this video, I want to go a little further into the COPA v. Wright judgment on appeal, the disqualification of Judge Mellor, Judge Mudd here, and my affidavit in the testimony and how it could play out with some strategy here. So let's go ahead. In reading some of the comments, thank you very much for Truth Crypto Rebel for making a comment there on the YouTube video, posting on X regarding the, what he said was this. Let me read it. He says, that affidavit, Crypto Rebel 6039, that affidavit will be the rock that slays Goliath. Judge Mellor, right now, it is a torpedo in transit, and COPA sees it on the radar. And with God's grace and guidance, it will strike the target in time. With the devastation, destruction, people in BSV don't realize the importance of what has occurred. Thanks to you, Gavin, having the guts and the wisdom to sling this stone. The way things have unfolded should make everybody realize that God's hand is upon everything that we do. Wow, well said, because it is I think a lot of people don't really realize, like he's saying, what happened at the contempt scheduling hearing and then the contempt jail, where they were going to sentence and lock up Dr. Wright. It was in between that time, actually shortly before that, I had that space with Scott and Casey and then Tufty, David Pierce came on the space, and then he yelled at Scott and said, this would have been right during Thanksgiving. And he yelled at Scott saying, you need to take that petition down, the change.org petition. After that, I realized there was a problem. I was like, you know what? This is wrong. And so I was like, I'm going to really start backing this petition. I signed it over the weekend. And then Monday morning, boom, it got banned off the internet. And I said, okay, something's up. I said, I've had enough. I did all these interviews with Tufty and David Pierce. I followed this case. I've been as neutral as I possibly can in this whole situation. But there's a point where you realize that the system has completely gone against you in this case. And that's what I saw happen because I followed it. So that's why I wrote the affidavit and I testified. Basically, I prepared, kind of a strategy on, I prepared the affidavit to be submitted in congruence with the motion to disqualify Mellor. And I knew that Craig Wright was facing that contempt. He had the contempt scheduling hearing. And then at that hearing, they asked him to come back in person. So at that point, I was like, you know what? If he goes in person, he's going to go to jail for sure. So I prepared the affidavit. Craig ended up using that as part of his motion to disqualify Mellor. And ultimately, I knew that if that affidavit went in with the disqualification of Mellor would really lose jurisdiction legally. I know he doesn't care, but legally it deprives him of jurisdiction because he's not supposed to be ruling on his own disqualification. Of course, Mellor doesn't care about that. That's why we call him Judge Mudd. But he ended up ruling on the fact, and the fact was I didn't go to any COPA event. That's what Mellor said. People just scathing, raving about this, and I mean, they got a BS, a Gavin hate group now on and Gregory Maxwell's Reddit forum and all that about this. This is like, they really, they really don't want me talking about this. They hate it, saying that Mellor went to a COPA event because they want to say, no, he didn't. He didn't go to a COPA event. Well, this is exactly what caused the problem for Mellor because he denied going to any COPA or CIPA event. That was really the tribal issue of fact. Well, what event did he go to? We saw him at that event with Tufty. He was taking pictures outside, talking about the case. He admitted going to events, multiple events. What were they called? They were something else. Okay. It wasn't, okay. This is where the tribal issue of fact came in. That had to have been ruled on by another judge. Mellor, he decided to play king. He's not the king. They may have a king in England, but it's not him. The king can do that, but not Mellor. Mellor is not allowed to just be the almighty king. It's even in their law system. They have a king over there, and he cannot play king. That's what he did. So in that case, if Wright is paying attention here and watching these videos, if he is, then Craig could be challenging this on appeal. Now, again, it is a separate issue from the appeal itself. It should be appealed separately, and the 30-day time limit on that, it starts probably, when the ruling happens. So it would be a separate appeal, and it would be filed with the appellate court on this particular, on the contempt. So he'd be appealing the contempt and the disqualification of Miller. That then can be denied by Judge Arnold and his cronies that also went to these COPA/KIPA events with Miller, because we already know that's how they're going to rule. But then potentially it could go to the Supreme Court. But he's got to get it to the appellate court first, and they've really got to make a ruling on a finding on it. And if it's pled properly, then he would. So, yeah, that is a real thing right there. It could ultimately slay the dragon, like Truth said, because it's not necessary to win the identity case right now at this point. In fact, it's not even possible. I mean, all they can do is reverse the case, or they could disqualify Miller and say this case is getting reversed because the judge was compromised, like he was in this case. So, to restore some sort of, I would say, respect in the UK judiciary, the House of Lords, ultimately they should just fire Miller, get him out of there. That's what they did with the judge. I'm not going to name his name in county in California. That once he went up against me, is he was flat out fired, gone, because he disgraced the bench. And they knew I was going up against him, and I wasn't going to let up. I was coming for him. I already came for him. So they decided to pull their plug and say, yeah, it's his fault. He's out of here. We're not taking the blame. And UK justice should do the same thing. Just go ahead and fire him, get him off the bench, and because it was completely disgraceful what he did in this case of just ruling on his own bias and disqualification and his own tribal issue of fact, which he knows better. He knows he could have actually, been sneaky. It's too late now, but I'll tell him what he could have done. He could have been sneaky and struck the affidavit as whatever untimely. He could have struck in it and not made a finding on it, potentially. But by him making a finding of the fact, saying, I didn't go to any COPA event, I didn't go to any KIPA event, that's a fact. That's a tribal issue of fact, pal. You can't just, now that has to go over to another judge. And he didn't do that. That right there made the error for Miller. And that factual issue didn't go to over the other court. It should have been. So yeah, it's pretty, it could slay this sucker. But ultimately, I think the more compelling case is the passing off case. And I saw Raphael made comments and asked about if this identity issue could go to the U.S. No, and it's not going to, most likely. I mean, if the whole case goes back, potentially, if it all goes back, it's going to be tried there in the U.K. And it will bring in a new a proper expert witness. Because Wright never had proper expert witnesses. The whole thing was compromised from Edgar Hansen, and they admitted the expert. So we know that's just the case was a sham from the start. Ultimately, with Edgar Hansen involved, that's how it played out. So will it go to the U.S.? No, it's not going to go to the U.S. I don't think it's necessary. The only case that really affects people is the passing off case, which potentially could happen in the future, but it's going to have to happen in 2 steps, multiple steps, man. It's got to go out in 2 steps, or multiple steps. And I'm not going to get into the strategy on how it should play out, but it's got to go I've had conversations with a couple people off the record about it, how it could play out. And I'm not going to share it online because COPA is watching my videos. Judge Mellors is watching my video. All these people are watching. I'm not going to share any sort of strategy of how I see things going down and playing out without publicly. Why would we do that? It's like sharing military strategies with people. Sorry, not going to happen. But yeah, there is ways that could be done. And it doesn't necessarily have to involve Dr. Wright, So, because he's got these sanctions against him that if he files any more cases, they're going to try to lock him up and throw away the key. That's what they said. Behind bars, forced inoculation, throw away the key, forget about him, he doesn't exist. And whatever you do, get rid of that cult, they say. I asked the guys on the space today, went on the space with Craig Mason and Kurt and Daniel Kraywitz and Bose and Alex Favell and a bunch of people. And, I went in there jokingly saying, like, how do I join this cult? I keep hearing about a cult. How do I join? And they said, I got to shave my head to join the cult now. Apparently there's a cult. Some people online have talked about it and, hey, whatever. So that's all I got. It was a fun time. Yeah, it was a pretty, I think that that strategy was like one of those little laser arrow focused targets right in there with that affidavit, right on point. Mellor raved about it for 2 pages in the judgment, in the contempt judgment. The ball's in Craig Wright's court. I'm not the quarterback here. So it's up to him on if he's going to follow that particular procedure on appealing the contempt part of it. That is a separate issue. So hopefully Craig, gets counsel, gets some wise legal advice on that issue, because it's technical, and I don't have all the procedures down over there in that court. So good luck to him. I know, and I'd like to see it. And ultimately, please, when it comes to this court stuff, just remember that it's all about entertainment. Think of me as Harvey Specter, and this is just another episode of Suits, and we're talking about it, having a good time. Ultimately, that's all it is. Okay, none of this should be taken as advice. You should not make bets or investments on any of this stuff. But I hope you find it entertaining, at least. All right, be sure to hit the ones, subscribe. And more to come. I will see you at the top. Later, guys.